So why are we using Roman Dutch law in a country and in a Zimbabwe and a continent where we don't have Romans and Dutch? It is because it's the law of subjugation. Why are we not using African law? Why are we using a law that determines, has a moratorium on when people can seek compensation in South Africa for land lost in colonialism? And you can only start seeking compensation for land that was lost after 1913, after the Land Appropriation Act. But why? What about the land that was lost since the Afrikaners began to come in what you call it, 1600?
Yes.
Or 1500? You see, a lot of people think that these Afrikaners only started coming in 1652. No, they were coming since the 1500s. They were coming as the VOC, right? And when they got here, Dutch East India Company, they began to appropriate land. They began to take land. But remember, in African culture, there was nothing like land ownership. Land was deemed to be something that belonged to the God who created the world. And we were only custodians who held the land in custody as communities that were led by kings and chiefs who didn't own the land. So by the mere fact of that certain people got compensation and then handed over land to whites, that was an illegality according to our own law and custom, because we did not sell land, because we never owned land. We were just custodians. A custodian can't give over title to something that they're only a keeper of. You see?
Yeah.
So the fact that the law that we use does not respect that, does not recognize those customs, does not give any life to those customs, makes it illegitimate law. The fact that it's by a majority of people who are more educated in the system and culture of Europe, and they do not get consent from their own individual or their own citizens to understand this new system that is contrary to African culture, means that it is illegitimate law. So that's what the South African courts stand for. They stand to continue to institute what is called the law of discovery, or the colonial law of the rule of the law of nations of 1453 that determined how to colonize the dark-skinned world. And that's why you see that when we had the land reform, they went to the SADC tribunal that was run by protocols written by South African jurisprudence and pushed by South African judges that made a decision that land reform must be reversed. But how can land reform be reversed when yet the decolonization agenda, of 1960 said that natives must be given that which they lost during colonialism? It was then ratified again in another law that's called the Native Convention that seeks to restore what natives lost during a crime against humanity of colonialism.
So the land reform that happened in the early 2000s was just a sort of ratification of that law.
It not only ratification of that law, it was giving life to it. But why was it giving life to it in that way? Because the law had failed to deliver justice to the people. So when laws are created to stop chaos, laws are created to stop fighting and wars. But when your laws are unjust, when your laws are illegitimate, when your laws don't give people justice or the majority justice, eventually the majority will ignore the law, fight and overthrow, which is a revolution. And that is what so-called happened during the land reform program, is that the government took its time negotiating with the British, allowing South Africa to take its independence. But the people that they had no land, the people that were dispossessed were sick and tired. And eventually they rose up and began to occupy the land because it was theirs. And the legal system that they were being forced to use, a Roman Dutch law legal system, a Lancaster House Conference, a law that is illegitimate, that was created by a few men sitting in a little room being told by their former colonizers how to create rules, had now reached its course where people could no longer tolerate it. So people rose up. That rising up, and then that rising up being given life by a law that was created, the Land Appropriation Act 3. You see? meant that it was a legitimate process at the end of the day, because that's what the people wanted.